In South Carolina specifically, we're one of only 5 states that has no form of open handgun carry.
I'm Dr. Duke, and this is Constitution Corner. Joined today by Josiah Magnuson, a House Representative, District 38 in South Carolina. Talk a little bit about the Constitution. Josiah, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Duke. It's a privilege to be with you today.
In some of our former conversations talking about Second Amendment rights, you're currently working on some legislation in the South Carolina House there that would strengthen Second Amendment rights for people across the state and maybe even lead to constitutional carry if everything works out. But one of the things you said to me in a former interview that I'd like to talk a little bit today, because it's a problem I have too, is one of the things you said is a problem is that many Republicans in your state, many otherwise conservative, gun-respecting, Second Amendment-liking Republicans, they just don't quite understand what's at stake. And one of the hardest things for you to get momentum behind your bill is to get some of those Republicans who really do support the Second Amendment to realize the constitutional threat. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think that is a fair thing to say. And I think that the more that we understand the Second Amendment, the more we'll be willing to stand up for it. But I think some people sort of just have this notion that it's just about hunting and about, sportsmanship. Certainly we need to protect those things. But the Second Amendment is about defending our country against tyranny and against the infringement of the Constitution itself. And it's our last line of defense. And if we don't get that right, then we're not going to get our laws right. And unfortunately, that's what's happened. We're really seeing so many different infringements on the Second Amendment across the country. In South Carolina specifically, we're one of only 5 states that has no form of open handgun carry. So, we're alongside California, New York, Illinois, and Florida, which are, all pretty much liberal states, more or less. But South Carolina needs some conservative, courageous leadership. And I think the biggest thing that we need to realize is that the states were created the states created the Constitution, they created the federal government, but the founders put in the Constitution the 10th Amendment, which is, equally as important as the Fourth Amendment, as the Second Amendment. But the states are there to stand in the way if the federal government becomes unconstitutional. And Alexander Hamilton even talked about how the reason that state officials take an oath of allegiance to the U.S. Constitution is so that we will enforce the Constitution. And we need to get back to that. We need to take courage, take a stand, and say, you know what, South Carolina is not going to enforce unconstitutional gun control. And so that's what me and Stuart Jones and some others are supporting, the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Say we're not going to enforce unconstitutional laws. I've worked on the nullification issue for Obamacare and some other things. But until we understand this aspect of the Constitution, that the states created the federal government and the states are there to stand in the way of its violation, of the violation of the Constitution, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. And so we need to get the people of our state to understand that, and then we need the leadership of our state to understand it as well.
Yeah, you look at Virginia right now. Virginia's a much more purple state than South Carolina, many would argue, right? It's a little bit more liberal, especially with its proximity to Washington, D.C. And you see all of these rural counties in Virginia now because they have to, right? Now that the governor is actively going after their guns and trying to institute all of these red flag laws and other things, that these counties are beginning to rally around, and they're turning their counties. It's not even just states' rights, which I think you're exactly right. We need to recognize that the Constitution empowers the state to oppose out-of-control federal government, but the counties in the individual states declaring themselves Second Amendment sanctuary counties. And you're trying to ultimately do that for the entire state of South Carolina, which is wonderful. In the time that we have left, I do want to ask you kind of a philosophical question. I know you were mentioning off camera that South Carolina actually requires a course at the university level on the Constitution for kids to graduate. Why is it, in spite of all of that, and at lower grades as well, there's civics requirements in the South Carolina education program, why are kids graduating from school so ignorant of the Constitution?
It's, again, a matter of enforcement. We have a requirement that for university students, public university students, they have to take 1 year of the U.S. Constitution in order to graduate. But it's just, again, a matter of we don't stand up for what's written in the law. And that's, again, it just comes down to courage, virtue. We've got to have stronger leadership in the state house and the state senate.
We only got about 50 seconds left, so I want to give you a final comment here. Make a final comment about how important the Second Amendment is as a constitutional value.
Well, it's the right of the people to keep and bear arms which shall not be infringed. And, George Mason says, who is the militia? It's the whole body of people except for a few public officials. It's about the people. And the way that the people can hold the government in check in the ultimate sense is having that right to keep and bear arms. And so that's why we have to guard it so vigilantly.
Well, Dave Chappelle, very African-American liberal comedian, came out just today and said, quote, "The Second Amendment is there to protect the First Amendment." So maybe we're beginning to make some progress countrywide, even among liberals, to recognize this. Thanks for joining me today, Josiah. Honor the Constitution by understanding it. You can go to thenewamerican.com and jbs.org for more info and more shows.